This next panel, if you can start preparing to come up, we'll be looking at capacity needs and systems requirements for governments to reap benefits for the data revolution for children. So to head that panel and to the moderator of that next session will be Yoka Brandt, Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. Please come up, Yoka. And the next can march in line behind her, please. Claire Melamed, Director of Growth, Poverty and Equality, Overseas Development Initiative. Priscilla Idele, Acting Chief of Data Analysis here at UNICEF. And Francesca Perucci, Chief Statistical Services Branch at the United Nations Statistics Division of DESA. I think we have one person missing. That's right. We do. Okay. Oh, no, we have. Here we go. Perfect. Zarko Sunderic, perfectly timed, Team Manager of the Social Inclusion, Poverty and Poverty Reduction Unit of the Government of Serbia. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And let me start by thanking all of you to be here with us today. This first ever Data for Children Forum. I think it's been a very exciting day so far. As Jeff just said, we're now moving, I think, to a very complicated issue: capacity building. When we sort of look at what we've done so far, I think it's fair to say that we covered quite a bit of ground. We spoke a lot about collecting, analyzing, using data, and I think in a way the panel just before us was very good at also explaining to us that we need to have the data, we need to have the right data, but we also need to know what to do with those data, including explaining to our decision makers why understanding data is important. So what we also heard this morning, I think, was from Amina, for those of you who were here this morning, Amina Mohammed, who also explained that when we look at the new sort of development agenda and the development context, how much more complex this context is when we compare it to 15 years ago, when we started with the Millennium Development Goals, now the SDGs, which is a much more complex sets of issues. And I think it's just, of course, the SDGs are also a reflection of their time. So it's not just about the fact that it's more goals and more targets and more indicators. I think some of the issues that came up this morning are also essential, like the emphasis on disaggregated data, the sort of what we talked about, the different types of data that we're getting now, and how do we integrate those, and the sort of wide range of actors that are now getting involved. And I think what we talked a lot about is that is all true, at a national level, at a global level, at a subnational level. And so the question, I think, for us is what does all this mean for our efforts in sort of building data-related capacity and systems, and what would we need to do differently? And I think it's great for the next hour to have this very distinguished panel with us that is going to take us through that difficult question. I'm not sure how technological we're going to be for this session. I don't think we have Ignite presentation, so you can rest a little bit assured there. But I do think we might take up some of the pigeonhole questions in the second half of this session, and we might even be old-fashioned and just allow you to ask some questions directly to the panel. So let me, I see this is a very gender-sensitive panel as well, so let me start with you, Zarko, if you don't mind. Because I think to know where we need to go, we also need to understand where we're actually coming from. So maybe you could share with us, looking back over the last decade or so, where would you say that Serbia has made real progress in collecting and using data for children, and what would be sort of the main challenges, taking account, what I've just said about the changing context. And if you could sort of maybe give us, one great thing and one sort of real challenge that we need to focus on, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I would just like to thanks to UNICEF for a very interesting discussion. Entire day, both moderators and speakers were really good. Speaking about those the capacities for let's say using data and statistics, I would say that I think that the first step is somehow to recognize the value of data, and I think that that we can move further on if we recognize this value of data. And when do we recognize this value? If we look, for example, in my country, we recognize this value, for example, in the cases of disasters. For example, this year we had the floods, and also we have this very horrible situation with the refugees from Syria and the other parts of the world, going through our country. So basically, in this situation, you face with a need to have data, and you realize how powerful data are. The other, let's say, way through which you realize how important data is through different development and political processes in which country participates. I would remind, of course, and all of us about, of course, MDG as one source of this need to report. So government can, of course, ignore once, but the second year, it's kind of stupid to ignore the same questions. So you start to think, yeah, but we don't have those data. We need to do something, and we need to produce, etc. Also, Serbia is deep into European integration process, so we need to report at least twice a year, or even more for some of the issues. So you become aware, first of all, that you need data, and when you have them, you start to realize that there is a trouble around, so you need to do something about that. Third, let's say, way to recognize the importance is through the pressure of different civil society groups. So we don't have, for example, the right numbers of Roma. We just know that these people are, of course, living in a bad condition. But some civil society organizations are starting to reporting very specific issues about Roma who are living, who are, of course, Serbian citizens, etc. Or we don't have any info as a government on what's the status of human rights in the for example elderly care institutions. So, and we do have civil society that jumped in, went in, checked the situation, etc. And they send us data, etc. and promote those data. This is how we become aware the value of the data. Of course, the best way to realize this is to have a responsible and accountable government, but this is not always the case.
Thank you very much. And can I just press you a little bit and say, well, what do you see as the single most challenge going ahead? Where do you feel a country like Serbia should develop, more capacity?
Yeah. I think the two issues that I would suggest as, let's say, the some steps to think and to work on. First is we have to find a way to make better links between producers and users. At certain point, you have the statistical offices and other producers that are, how to say, they're powerful. The power is there. They think they know what society needs. And yeah, in a way, of course, they are experts and they know a lot. But on the other hand, there is a lot of knowledge on the need on the side of the government, and this language between statistics and let's say the government needs to be somehow strengthened. But even probably more the rest of the society, the academia, the civil society, etc., etc. So this discussion between users and producers is something that I would select. And the second one is a transparency of data. Yeah, I mean, statistical offices around, they're producing a lot of information and other producers, but not always and not easily in all our countries data are available, so not everyone can use them. I think that, as I said at the first point, data, we need to recognize data as a value. We need to give the value to data, which means that it's a public good. We somehow need to proclaim that data are public good and that all society has to find a way to use it. So I think that we need to work on the transparency and availability of different databases, different data, etc.
Thanks very much. Moving to a different part of the world, Priscilla, you've actually worked a lot in Eastern and Southern Africa, and so listening to what you've just heard about Serbia, are there some things that you recognize, that you feel that are similar in the contexts that you've worked in, about maybe sort of the recognition, the importance of recognizing the value of data, and are there some things that would be, completely different from your experience?
Thank you. Thanks, Yoka. Not completely different, but going back to the title of this session, data capacity and data systems. It's a big topic that we could discuss for a whole month, but we have squeezed it into a few minutes. And if we look back to what does that mean, what is a data system, what is data capacity? It involves things like human beings. We need people to collect the information, we need people to analyze the data, to interpret it, and present it and use it. We need structures to collect that, and we need political commitment, we need an accountability mechanism for data systems, we need infrastructure, whether it's computers, whether it's PDS to collect the information. So looking at that and looking at the region, what progress has been made in those areas, I would say there are some areas that where much progress has been made, particularly in data collection, robust data collection, systems such as the DHS, the MIX, or the AIDS indicator surveys that are more disease or sector specific. There is a lot of progress that has been made. Just giving an example of Kenya, Kenya has conducted almost over 10 nationally or subnationally representative surveys using all the key, well-developed programs such as the MIX and the DHS. But it also is still struggling with development of other types of data. So we have data coming from service statistics, from health management information systems, from education systems, and so on. And looking at that, some systems within administrative data are well developed than others because that's where the development partners have put their efforts. Health, HIV/AIDS, education, a lot of investments go to those sectors. Then when you look at the other social sectors such as child protection areas, nobody is investing in them, but we want information nonetheless. We have development partners working on those areas, but routine systems for those areas are not developed at all. They are very weak, and they are still wanting. Then if we look at infrastructure, looking both at the institutional structures as well as the data management systems, all countries have an established national statistical office. So all of them have some form of office. Some are stronger than others. But the capacity to manage and run those offices relies a lot on the political and the governance structures in the countries. How many national statistical offices are autonomous and able to fundraise for themselves or to make specific decisions? So whereas that effort has been put there to establish those structures, there are still some areas which are lacking, which need attention. If we look at funding, a lot of data that are collected within the region, not only in East and Southern Africa, but also across sub-Saharan Africa, is donor dependent. We've not done sufficient effort to ensure that there are sustainable mechanisms to raise funding that governments can use to collect information using all those available capacities. So there's a lot of push for big data, open data. I don't know if there's closed data, small data, big data, whatever names we call them. But we have to look at the key basic issues that will enable us get that information. So based on what my colleague from Serbia mentioned, I think we are struggling with the same issues. We are struggling with the issues of producers and users. So there's a lot of production of data, and the countries are actually overloaded with a lot of information. It's the use that's the problem, particularly at subnational level. So that is where the problem is. Training, capacity building, a lot is localized at the central level and not at the subnational level. Efforts are made to fly people to, to America, to Britain. I was trained also outside my country. And that was the development partners' money that trained me, and here I am. But where I'm needed, maybe I could be needed at my district where I was born. I've never done any data collection there, but I've done a lot of analysis here at, UNICEF HQ. So that is exactly what is replicated at the country level, and we need to think about that level of service delivery if we have to improve the use and data collection and to make it fit for purpose. That is the common word, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Priscilla. I think that. And thanks for raising some very important issues that you also stated about, the donor dependency and financial sustainability. And I think when we sort of move to the global level, I'd like to ask Francesca in the UN Statistical Division has obviously played a big role in sort of strengthening capacity of statistical offices, and sort of listening to the two previous panelists. Do you feel that we've actually put the efforts in the right place? I mean, what do you think are the sort of lessons learned from how we've been helping build up capacity so far, and what are the specific issues around financial sustainability and donor dependency that we would need to take into account in the future?
Yes, thank you. Listening to them, of course, I was going through the past 25 years and thinking, what have we been doing? And of course, the issue of, we talked a lot about data utilization and understanding, how you match the policy priorities with the data we produce. And I remember we were talking about that 25 years ago, but I don't think we've really moved very far since then. I must say, with the MDGs, there was some small data revolution. We are now in an era of data revolution. I think some sort of revolution at the beginning of a transformation was with the MDGs, when for the first time, we started to look at policy priorities and indicators. And there was a big difference. It was the first time that we were really looking at the indicators attached to a specific priorities that was defined and decided by the policymakers. So that was really the first moment that we had a clear connection. So that was important. And I think that was somehow that triggered a new sort of approach to capacity building and to working with governments and to working with the whole national statistical system, bringing together the line ministries and the national statistical offices. So that was somehow positive and good development. And I hope that with the SDGs, we translate that into something, a real revolution, where we really ask ourselves, what are we collecting? What are the data that we need to collect? That was mentioned earlier by the previous panel. How much data we collect that is not actually used, is not even looked at. And I think that's a key question, how we match the data needs, the priorities with what we actually produce. And someone said, I forget what speaker said, that it's a big responsibility of the policymakers, developing the culture, understanding how to use the data, etc. I personally think, and I'm a statistician, so I talk for my own community, I think it's also our responsibility. And perhaps our responsibility is stronger and bigger than the policymakers, because the statisticians in theory should know how to translate those data, how to process those data, how to make them digestible, how to make them usable, and how to make sure that they reach the local communities, how to make sure that they reach those users that have to use them. But in terms of the capacity building efforts and what our division, our office has seen over the years, your question, how did we work and did we recognize some of the priorities that were highlighted by the previous speakers? I would say yes, certainly, especially the last 15 years or so, there was a lot of work on strengthening, for instance, the availability of data, disaggregated data, and that again, was a good sort of lesson from the MDGs, that after a few years, it was clear that measuring progress at aggregated level, at national level, was really sort of misleading, totally misleading, that we needed to go down and disaggregate the data. We worked a lot on the building the capacity to also use the international standards. And I'm referring to the whole development of what we called reconciling the national international monitoring. A lot of data were there, a lot of resources were there, surveys and use of administrative data, but the quality of those data was low simply because there was no clear, good understanding of the metadata, of how, the internationally agreed standards. And a lot of work we did was really to improve that and make sure that there was comparability, there was, the training. Really, we go to simple training of statisticians in line ministries, statisticians in national statistical offices, to really use the standards to make sure that the data are of good quality and are comparable and usable. So those were the main, programs those years. But it was also a lot on data literacy, of course, overall, how you present the data. If I go back to our meetings, of the interagency and expert group on MDG indicators, every year, the group of countries that participated in those meetings, the main recommendations always included improving the capacity to analyze the data. Because all statisticians in those countries felt that they had the data, but the statisticians themselves didn't know how to analyze them, how to tabulate them, how to present them, and communicate them to the user. So that was something on which a lot of these programs were focusing. But really, I would say that the main lesson from that experience, the last 15 years, I should say, was understanding the priorities, building this communication. We talked a lot about building the user-producer communication, and I don't think we are not there yet. And I think there is so little understanding of from the statistician side, from the data producer side, of what data do we need to collect. And that's what we should ask, not why we're not using the data. It's because probably we collect a lot of data that are not really necessary, and we put the resources sometimes in the wrong place.
And do you see any particular new challenge coming up in the context of the SDGs?
One particular challenge, I see many challenges, but yes. Of course, we see huge challenges with the new agenda, and I don't want to get into the business of the number of indicators that we'll have to deal with, simply because of the number of targets and the many aspects that each target include. But I think the main challenge is the idea of the no one left behind cannot be translated into real implementation unless we have disaggregated data. And we go back to what Attila was talking about this morning, how do we do it? Can we pack all our surveys with like 1 million questions, and can we explode the sample size to the point that then we can really disaggregate and have, you know, a sample that is large enough to have the level of disaggregation that we need? So we really need to find a balance. I'm not sure where the answer is, if it's a question of developing integrated household survey programs where you can really cover all the variables that you need to cover without exploding these surveys to a level that becomes unmanageable. Making better use of administrative data for sure. But I think the answer is also perhaps integrating the sources and using. We did a little bit of that with the MDGs, working on small area estimates, trying to integrate census data with other sources, etc. I think that's also one possible avenue. But I think the key, the investments, the real revolution has to happen there. Building capacity at the national level to be able to have disaggregated data. Otherwise, we leave the most disadvantaged behind, and that's not what the agenda is asking for.
No, thank you very much. That's certainly a big challenge in itself already. So, Claire, we've talked about big data and small data, open data, closed data, but apparently we now, after a small revolution, we also have a real revolution with the SDGs. Could you talk a little bit about, you know, what you see in terms of the opportunities that would arise out of this revolution to sort of get better data for children?
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here, and you know, like everybody said, I'm really grateful to UNICEF for the invitation and for what I'm sure has been a really exciting day. I think in terms of opportunities, there are now opportunities to overcome a lot of the problems that have already been raised on this panel. So clearly, I mean, I think one of the big opportunities that we have at the moment is simply the spotlight which is being shone on data, and we hope the kind of political momentum, resources, and so on that will follow from that. To some extent, all of these very many events and forums and so on data and the data revolution that are now happening all over the world are part of creating a new sort of global norm around we expect data to be better than it is. We expect politicians and others to be using data, to be data literate, to be, as somebody said in the previous panel, there should be a much stronger expectation that the decisions that are made are based on data and that data is of good quality. And I think we just have a real sort of political opportunity now to kind of turn that growing expectation into a norm, into something that is just much more the sort of received wisdom globally at every level, at national level, at international level, and so on. But I think part of the excitement of the data the revolution bit of the data revolution, in a sense, is also a sense that at this particular moment, while we still have all of the challenges that have been already talked about in terms of capacity building, really getting the kind of official statistics right, and that has to be the bedrock, the sort of foundations of the data house, if you like. But we now have an opportunity to build, an extension or some new stories onto our data house in the form of some of these new possibilities that are being opened up in the area of big data, and being able to do things faster, being able to get deeper into some issues, and to be able to actually improve some of the ways in which we do the old things, for example, just very simply by the use of mobile phones and tablets to make survey collection, to make surveys easier. So there's a whole sort of range of ways in which there are new opportunities opened up. But I think it's really important that we think of these not as replacements for the kinds of things that we've just been talking about, but very much as an enhancement of what is going on already. And the challenge is not so much to see, how can we throw away some of the stuff that we've been doing and do something different and shiny and new, but how can we use the different and shiny and new to combine with what we've already been doing for a very long time, and, there are still many, many issues with, to actually create something which is a kind of better combination of both.
Thanks
Yes,
very
so
much, Sarah. I can
actually,
see you-
yes, really good questions coming up on the pigeonhole. If we could put them up, and then Yoka, you can throw to them, particularly on the point of the SDGs. So SDGs are expected to have 17 goals, 169 targets, and even larger numbers of indicators. What would the implications on governments' data systems be and their capacity? So over to you, Yoka, to throw it to the panel.
Yeah, I think we already started talking about that a little bit, but it is maybe interesting to see that also from a government perspective. And I don't think you had a chance to really talk about this yet, Zarko. So maybe you can take that question first, and then I'll ask others to.
Yeah. This sounds really terrifying, these 169 targets, you know. And it's just not possible, you know. So it's, of course, it's gonna be probably situation, and you are, of course, probably guys aware of it. It's going to be a situation where the governments will probably choose priorities and things that which will their focus. So not all countries, of course, will have all of these 169. So it needs to be like internal domestic discussion on where to focus in the next 10 years or so, combining different priorities, because the countries, of course, some countries are in a, let's say, excellent economic environment, some are in the deep crisis, some are facing problems with the population or depopulation, etc. So based on all these internal issues, you know, we will probably select with your support. This is definitely one. This is definitely going to be the process that we will go through. But I will also touch this issue on the capacity of the local national capacity to deal with those with those data. It is interesting, you know. It was interesting to me to listen to the perspective of the private sector, which is saying, you know, give us more data and we will know what to do with it. While on the other hand, you know, all others are in the room are saying, you know, it's too much, you know, I mean, we cannot deal with those data. So it's probably the matter, of course, with the motivation. It's probably the capacity of all of us sitting in this room, you know, to somehow to decide what is the priority, where to go, etc. That's one. And number two, the capacity of the guys who are working on the analysis and who are trying to translate those data into some you know, to define the problem, and then the third, to define the policy. You know, that's the number three challenge. So, for example, in Serbia, 10 years ago, we didn't have good data on the domestic violence. Now we do, and we are saying we do have domestic violence numbers that are going up. Are they? We are really not sure, you know. Maybe we had more violence before, but we just didn't know, and we didn't collect data in the right way, etc., etc. So we need to be really careful, and we need to know what to do with data, and we need to know how to analyze it. And number three, it's I would say, you know, this is, if you ask me, that's the biggest problem in my country. You know, when we realize that there is an issue and a challenge, you know, what to do about the policies, you know, and this link between this analysis and the policy in itself, you know, this is something that this is the biggest need for capacity development, I would say.
I just wanted to pick up on the issue that you raised about, you know, the private sector, and to sort of also get the views of others in this sort of terrifying task that we're having with the new set of development goals. We also, I think, have an opportunity, because there's so many different actors around. I mean, what kind of different partnerships could we actually build that would also help, you know, create capacity? I could see, Claire, that you want to come in there.
Sure. Well, it's very interesting that on this side of 44th Street, we have this, you know, meeting really getting deep into data collection for children and some of the kind of deep issues that poses. On the other side of 44th Street, we have a upstairs in the UN Millennium Hotel. There we have a group of 44 different organizations, some large number of governments, some private sector, some UN agencies, and others in a room discussing the setting up of a new global partnership on data, exactly to tackle some of these issues, to really start to think about, okay, if we do have sudden, large amounts that we're moving in a sense from a world where the data production has been predominantly the domain of governments and of academic researchers and so on, to one in which most data which is being produced now is being produced by the private sector. And how do we sort of navigate this new world? These two groups are going to have to talk to each other. Either we keep the two data streams separate and we never allow public sector institutions to make any benefits from, what might be the potential benefits of this private sector data, or we create some kind of mechanism for them to talk to each other and work out, because we don't know the answer yet, how can they share data between them? What is the kind of best way to navigate the different interests, the different incentives, the very different, as somebody again was saying in the last panel, different types of data, different issues around quality and so on. But there has to be something set up to allow those conversations to happen.
So Priscilla, how would you see that playing out at the country level in very concrete terms? I mean, the different sets of data, the partnerships, the new partnerships that we could possibly strike. How would that work in a concrete setting that you're used to working in?
Already with the MDGs, we had significant problems getting people to talk together, getting people to collect information in a systematic way, in a harmonized way. So I think the starting point will be getting the football team in order. Because if the football team doesn't respect the referee, and if the team, or if the referee decides not to ref, then the playfield becomes a free-for-all. And that is essentially what's happening in most of the countries. Systems are very compartmentalized, a long word. I didn't make it up. But, and these are either by sector, by type of data source, by donors. I've been to countries where the government is actually begging the donor to release the data to them. And I asked them, how did they get the data? Where did they get them from? From our health facilities, and how did they do that? Why do you have to get permission for your own data? And I made a joke and say, give me this country for 1 year, and all these donors will have to beg you for data. So it just doesn't make sense to have all those parallel reporting systems. And I believe that even with 169 targets, we have those data at the country level. It's just that it's spread all over the place. There's hardly any place that you can walk to and get all the information. And because the information is also inconsistent, the same indicator can be collected by 10 different agencies using just a play with a few words, condom use at 1 month, condom use during every sex, condom use at 3 months, condom use at regular sex, condom use with a regular partner, condom use, and it's all condom use, and nobody will come together to say, let's just collect this indicator this way, and it will serve all our purposes. So that is what's happening. So until we go to a point where we get people to come together, develop a very concrete strategic data strategy at the country level to say, these are the data types that we need. Map out what exists, what doesn't exist, and how do we address those gaps. Then we shall be able to know whether we really have gaps or we don't. But so long as that doesn't happen, I think we shall forever be complaining there are too many indicators, but I believe the data is at the country level. We are just disorganized, and we have refused to have a referee.
So on that point, if I could be referee and just bring in perhaps one or two more questions from a pigeonhole. I was trying to look for a relevant question on the condom irregular one. Didn't come. There was nothing regular about it. So perhaps the first one, which is the most popular, Yoka, what do you think? How do you balance long-term capacity development needs with short-term data needs?
I think that's it also reflects a little bit of what Priscilla had just said. So maybe, Francesca, do you want to comment on this one? So you have different, I guess this also comes from the fact that you have different players, different sets of data, but if you don't have a referee or a strategy, or if you don't turn the country over to Priscilla, then you... But how do you see this tension between the long-term capacity?
Long-term and short-term, but also I'd like to say a couple of words about the referee. I think we need the referee, and I think what Priscilla has said something very important, and that you can integrate the sources and you can bring together these pieces, but you need a system. And I think we have to be careful when we talk about all this innovation. There is innovation in terms of data collection tools, the cell phones, and making, creating synergies and making data collection faster and more efficient, etc. There is also innovation in terms of the topics, the type of data you put together, and that's, I think, the sort of broader idea of big data. So it's there where you need, you can use tablets and cell phones and still apply the same international standards that have been agreed 25 years ago. But if you want to go into the area of building a partnership between some private sector and civil society organizations and the official national statistical system, there you need a referee. And there you need to understand what you're putting together, what type of data. You have issues of human rights issues, introducing biases, etc. So just to, I thought that point was important. But on the question of long-term and short-term, I'm not sure you have short-term needs and long-term needs. When we talk about building capacity for statistical production, everything has to be sustainable. I'm not sure the short-term needs. Everything has to be built in a sense that, you strengthen civil registration systems. And those respond to, providing data in the short term, but those have to be sustainable. And that implies, building infrastructures, working with local authorities. So I'm not sure what is meant exactly by that. Who asked the question?
Who asked the question? Yeah, maybe.
It could have been a remote question. That's what we're not, because
right.
there are a lot of people who are tweeting and writing about this from outside.
But let me look at the other panelists. Is there anybody who wants to sort of respond to this sort of possible tension between long-term capacity needs and short-term? I can see both Zarko and Claire wanting to come in.
I mean, I don't think there should be a tension in an ideal world, and I don't think it shouldn't be too difficult to marry the two. So I don't think we should be carried away with the idea there's some sort of fundamental contradiction between short-term needs and long-term needs. But I can see that in a context where you have very big data gaps, for example, if you are, a big international NGO who wants to come and set up a new program in a country, and you want to, you need a baseline for your monitoring. Ideally, what you would do is put your resources together with lots of other resources and help to build up the national statistical office and others in that country to provide that data that you would need for your baseline. That would be the long-term view. Unfortunately, I strongly suspect that many organisations faced with that dilemma would rather just go out and do their own survey in the community in which they were planning to run the project, and that would be the baseline. And there would be in that case, there is a direct competition for a specific set of resources. Do we invest for the long term, accepting that, maybe we won't get a very good baseline this time round, and maybe our donors will complain because we're not being rigorous enough in our monitoring and evaluation because we don't have a good baseline, or do we or do we kind of go with the financial incentives that we have? We've got to have a good monitoring and evaluation because our donors insist on it. We know it's not the best, we know it's not really the right thing to do, but we're just going to run this survey because we have to, even if it's not the correct use of our resources. So I think, there are lots of scenarios in which there would be a trade-off between the two. And I think this comes back. I suspect every answer is going to come back to the referee. What you want is some way of, changing the incentives so that those organisations make slightly different decisions. But I suspect, that would have to be done at quite a sort of broad global level, because a lot of these sort of, particularly when one talks about these, you know, international organizations, it's those global incentives that they're facing off.
Zarko, you have the same?
Yeah, I think it's, this question is probably leading us to the bad conclusion. So I wouldn't, how to say, I would I would not, you know, like to go deep into this one, and why. First of all, I think that the psychology could probably answer this question better than us here. And there is one issue where all of us who has our own toys and our own surveys and our own LSMSs and mixes and HBSs and silks and other things, we're pushing governments to add more and to take more. And the system is, you know, slow but accepting over time more and more toys. But and at certain point it becomes our toy, you know. So it's my toy. So I'm not giving up from my toy. And I spoke with Aleksandra Jovic from UNICEF Serbia, you know, and she said inertia is actually the issue, and I would agree with that. You know, it's inertia. You know, it's hard to ask the question. You know, are we really paying attention to something that is really not very important at this moment of my development? So from time to time, probably all of us should ask this question. But since our governments are not very often capacitated to ask this question, so it's probably you guys should remind us to ask questions. Do we really need all these surveys? Or we should think, you know, maybe we can exclude something and add some really specific thing that we need for the marginalized group to see how they live, you know. So it's probably that this can make, we need feng shui in statistics.
I think that is the best recommendation so far. I know that Sarah is keeping track of time there, so I'd just like to sort of pick up on one question that is came out of the pigeonhole, as well as an issue that we've brought up several times during the previous sessions, and it's formulated here as how can we ensure that citizen-generated data is considered a legitimate source that's also useful for governments. And I would like to sort of link that to what we've discussed earlier about this forum, that it's not just data for children, but also data by and from children. So I'd like to, you know, each of you to just briefly respond to, you know, what we can do to sort of make this indeed an important source of data. So maybe just go starting with you, Francesca, and then move along.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And in fact, there is a lot of work being done and a lot of discussion. Just this morning, there was a panel on a new research on understanding the dimensions of poverty using groups of poor people to develop the understanding of the dimensions and really defining the indicators based on that. And so that's just an example, and a lot of work being done also from various communities, like for older people, people with disability, etc. And there, I think, you know, that's part of the data revolution, I think. The idea that you can really build on these efforts and bring them together and understanding, you know, what the ones who are the sort of the actors, how they want to be measured, what they think their dimensions are, they need to be measured. That's one example. I think we go back to the referee. And perhaps the referee in this case is, I don't know, the Statistical Commission. Somehow all this has to be channeled through some sort of system where they get, you know, validated. The data get validated and they're used the way they should be used by all policymakers. So perhaps Statistical Commission, some system where you can really assign a value to this data and become part of the mainstream use of data.
Priscilla?
Thank you again. I think it depends on the purpose of the data, and I think citizen-generated data has been used over a long period of time. I have colleagues here that work with specific international NGOs that use a lot of participatory methods that lead up to specific interventions in the community. So it's not something new. And And we now are talking about U-Report, which is, collecting information, perceptions of, end users on the different services they receive. So for me, I'm not quite sure why the question is there, because it's happening, and therefore it shouldn't be an issue. We just need to make it, to regularize it and make it part of the process of assessments of programs and so on. But otherwise, it's happening. We just need to strengthen it. Thank you.
Claire?
No, I completely agree. It's absolutely essential. I mean, I think, exactly as Priscilla said, surely we're past the point where we think it's okay to just kind of collect a set of indicators that just tell people that their lives are getting better. There has to be some way in which, in our data set, we also ask them, and we allow them to tell us whether their lives are getting better or not. That absolutely has to be seen as a kind of fundamental part of the data toolkit that we have to paint the most accurate picture of societies. That's what we're doing. Just like words, just like pictures, the numbers that we use are just telling a story and painting a picture. And partly that picture has to come from those people who are the subjects of the story. So I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, one of my kind of data fantasies is that we can stop talking about citizen-generated data and big data and this, and we can just talk about data. And exactly as Francesca said, data which has certain, has to, in a sense, have gone through certain sort of quality control. It has to have certain characteristics in order to be called data, which include, quality control, ethics, trust, and so on. All those things are incredibly important. But they're important for all data. So I think, we just have data, and it comes from different places, and it's used for different things. But, we should stop having this kind of strange and arbitrary classifications between different things, which are all just parts of the same picture.
Great. Zarko?
Yeah. A good example, I would say, from a country is that when we were updating the law on social assistance, there were some civil groups which had very serious problems with the targeting of the social assistance in Serbia. So they did have some data that were telling that we are not doing good job while targeting, so that we need to do some changes in the legislation. And so the government allowed or invited civil society to jump in and to listen to those things, and some of those data changed some articles of the legislation, and I think this is really good example. Second good thing is when we produce those two-year government report on social inclusion, poverty reduction, we regularly invite civil society to send us some analysis and data that we don't have and that we are not producing, that are not official. And those things, which, as Claire said, which are methodologically, put in a good way, and we can really trust that the experts are looking at those data. So I really think that this is also very important, that we need to really be careful about this. We use them and they become a part of the government report, and which basically mean this is somehow becoming an official, so we need to deal with this issue which is recognized within the issue. Again, I think that that we need to create more conversation between users and producers, and this is the only way, in a really honest way, and this is the way to improve things, So this is how citizen data will become public data.
Right. Well, thank you very much for making it circular, because that's also the point where you started off for the importance, I think that was also emphasized by other panelists of understanding the priorities and improving the communication between users and producers. I think we've...
I think the referee, unless we want to tackle that last one, but it's a big one, about the dark side of the internet, we might have to park that one, because as a referee, I'm watching the clock.
Right.
And we've got coffee and an exciting new presenter after the break, who you all know who that is. So over to you, Yoka, to wrap up.
Well, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to wrap up. I think I'd just like to sort of maybe take a couple of issues that were, and so one is, I think, the sort of general agreement about the importance of this better link between users and producers, that there's still a lot to improve there. I think when we talk about, building capacity, the importance of building capacity for disaggregated data is going to be, crucial when we talk about achieving the SDGs. I think a lot about big data, small data, open data, citizen-led data, but we concluded that it would be really good if we could just talk about data and different data for different purposes, but without, compartmentalizing it too much. A third point is that, there's lots of opportunities with new technology, new actors, but let's try also to use that to build on what we already have, rather than creating all sorts of parallel systems. And I think the last point that I would like to sort of highlight is the point that Priscilla was also raising, that the important thing is that you sort of pull it all together and then sort of have indeed a referee, because without a referee, there's no football match that is going to end with a positive result. So I'd like to sort of thank the panelists and indeed invite everybody to go for the break and for coffee, and back in half an hour, right?
4:30 exactly.
Okay,
yes,
good.
please. Thank
Thank
you
you
very much.